Greetings and salutations, Afrolites. It is I, Afromandius, back with another video today. Apologize for the week I hiatus. I was just doing a lot of schoolwork and I realized that a whole week has passed. That's what happens when you're bogged down and you're busy with life, is that you tend to let it go past you and whatnot. But, short intro aside, I just want to say that I am really happy with how these videos are coming out. And, I also saw that, my last video, Creating a Champions, Ronin the Alien Blade, has probably the highest view count that I've ever seen on my channel with 58 views. That is incredible. So I know that there are people watching out there. I don't know if they're watching it in its entirety or if they're kind of watching halfway through and they're like, Family Guy Funny Moments Part 32 is on there, but you know what? I don't care because I know that people are out there listening, and that's all that matters to me, is that my story is getting out to you folk, and regardless of whether you are subscribed to the channel or I just happen to be on your For You page, doesn't really matter to me, because in all honesty, I am kind of happy with how it's starting off, where I don't really have a entirely like big fan base, and where it's it's kind of building up. So again, I'm gonna make this a short intro. You guys already know what the deal is, so get yourself nice and comfortable. I know it's kind of early in the morning time, around 7 where I am right now, so kind of get yourselves nice and comfortable, kind of just rest up, grab yourself some breakfast, some Waffle House, or cook yourself some eggs, and let Papa Afro serenade you with his sultry tunes. And today we're going to be going over another champion. I know I'm not a broken record. I'm not going to repeat the saying, but just stick with me. This one's actually going to be really interesting today because, as I check through all my like catalogs and my videos and whatnot, I've been going a lot more in depth with the, obviously in the Great War, like the main conflicts between the Jury Rays and the Xerxians, right? But there's also the Dra'Gons, which also play a role in the, Great War saga. But, in all my videos, I've never really had the attention and the spotlight on the fourth race that takes place in the Great War. I mean, sure, they have been mentioned every now and then, and they obviously do play a great, a significant role in the Great War, being the allies of the Jury Rays. But looking back on it, I never really went in depth and talked about like who they are and what they are. It's just been minor mentions of them today, and that would be the elementals. And that kind of makes me sad, because it's like, with all these creations that I have, I don't want to feel like I am like giving one the higher pedestal compared to the other. I love all my creations equally. As weird as it is to say, it is very much true that these are, in a technical sense, these are like my kids, right? Obviously, they're not my, they came from my mind vagina, my mind penis impregnated my mind vagina, and then it gave birth to these characters. I'm probably going to edit that out. I am so sorry. I don't know where I was going with that. Anywho, like, these are my children. They came like from me. They came from my imagination and how I grew up and whatnot. So I don't want to try to like give one the spotlight over the other, and it kind of breaks my heart, because I love all my like creations and I love them all equally, regardless of how much one is given the spotlight over the other. Obviously, like throughout the stories I will be presenting and how I do my comics and whatnot, some people may think I have biases towards some characters and others. I don't want that, but I can't change how people view it, and in a weird kind of sense, I do have favorite characters that I do make and whatnot, right? But long tangent aside, let's talk about the elementals right quick. Who are they? What are they? They are a race of beings that are presented in the Great War Saga, and get this, they are made of elements, right? So today in this Create a Champions video, we're actually going to be talking about one of these elementals, and that being Kova Dragoon. Who is Kova? What is Kova? I already said what he is. He's an elemental. So basically, who Kova is that he is a sand elemental. That's right. He comes from the Sand Clan and the elemental like planet. I don't really have a name for it yet. I'm still kind of jotting it down. In fact, in a weird sense, out of all these like, races that I've named them, it's kind of weird that you got Xerxians and you got the Jury Rays and you got the Jurians. What are the people who are that can turn into different elements based on where their climate is? The elementals. It's very simple, but it's like their name is like gonna be something. I don't know yet, but elementals are probably the most easiest to pronounce it when it comes to that sort of thing, and it's straightforward. So, with the elementals, and with Kova and whatnot, where did Kova come from? Where did he go? Where did he come from, Kanai Joe? So, Kova is a unique character because from where we see him, he kind of already is living his life. He didn't like, it's not like he comes from a royalty family or he comes from like a sad background yet, but he's a simple man. He's a simple elemental man. He's a simple elemental man who is also a family man. He comes from a long generation of sand elementals who believe in honor and believe that family always comes first. And there's nothing really that sticks out throughout his childhood other than the fact that the elementals come from a race of beings who believe in just isolating themselves. They don't really believe in trying to go after conflict. They're more or less to themselves. Like, think of like how George Washington wanted like the US. They wanted to stay absolutely neutral and wanted nothing at all. Look at where we are now. Good Lord, you can make a Beyblade out of George Washington's tomb with how much he's spinning in his grave, right? But with all that being said, the elementals are a race of beings who don't really want anything to do with the war. Kind of similar to how Cinderella Man's race didn't really want anything to do with the war. But, with everything that's going on and whatnot, there was one particular individual who just did... He wanted to see if there was any beneficial to the war, and that was King Yami. King Yami is going to play a significant role not significant role like in this like Great War Saga, but something is going to happen to where it brings over to the next saga, or after the saga and whatnot. But he's going to have his own separate video, and who knows, maybe with his evil tendencies he may be a bastard. Anywho, so let's, that's kind of focusing, we'll talk about Yami in a minute, but let's focus on Dra'Gon. So Dra'Gon, Kova Dra'Gon. He, as I mentioned before, is a sand elemental, and, as I mentioned, compared to all the other characters that I have created and I have made videos about, his story actually begins to where he's kind of already like settled down and that he is kind of content to where he is now. So what it was his childhood like? It's not really like, not to say that his childhood wasn't important. He obviously like had an honorable father, and his father, and I say that, he doesn't come from royalty, but he does come from a long lineage of respected, clans. I got to be careful how I say clans and whatnot, because there's a couple other people who decided to use the term clan, but basically he comes from a long lineage of the Sand people, and his father was one of the most high-ranking, high-respected members of that clan and was a chieftain and whatnot. So as I said, he doesn't technically come from like royalty and whatnot, but in a sense that his father was very much a high respected member and that he had shoes to fill and whatnot. So, he kind of had to take up his father's role as kind of like the clan leader and kind of keep an eye on his people and whatnot. So, at this point in the story, he's kind of already like living, he basically like he's already a grown ass man at this point. He's kind of, he's done his dues. He's matured. He doesn't really have any much room to grow yet, but he has a family now. He's kind of settled down. He's kind of keeping an eye on his people, making sure that they're okay and whatnot. So, at this point, he's kind of happy and content. Until, say it with me now, the Great War happens. Yay. Again, I'm not going to say what the Great War is because I've already mentioned it before, but basically that's kind of what drives Kova to kind of, he wants to like stay completely out of it. He wants to be there for his people and his family. But there's just this one teensy tiny little thing called his king suggesting that all able-bodied male like elementals and female elementals, excuse me. So all able-bodied like elementals, regardless of what age you are, at most like let's just say like 16 to like if you're still able to fight in your 50s, right? Anywho, so all able-bodied elementals, get your stuff together, say, give kisses to your family, tell them that you'll be back as soon as you can. We got to fight in a war. And, regardless of what Yami's like plan was to do in the Great War is kind of like, that will be presented in his video when I get to him. But basically Kova kind of had to say goodbye to his like kids and his wife and whatnot, but he made a promise to his youngest daughter stating that he'll be back as soon as he can. When he made that promise and he left, that is basically the last time he's ever going to see his family. This is going to play a big role later on when I, talk about when he goes to Earth and whatnot. So, with all that being said, like fighting in the Great War, it was not, obviously wars are never easy, but for Kova, he wasn't a violent man. He was very much someone who just wanted to avoid conflict and never really wanted to hurt anyone. But over time, as he goes on different types of missions and has to help out with the soil and, make sure that the resources are good, he realizes that he's going to have to put his pacifism to the side and become, has to fight in this war. Because if he wants to go home, he has to fight in the war. So, fighting he did. And he was surprisingly good at it because, Kova, again, wasn't really a violent man, but he did, with his powers and abilities, which I'm going to get into later on, kind of helped him secure a place in being one of the most versatile and one of the most dangerous characters in all of the Legend universe. So, I'll get to that when I talk about his powers and abilities, but as the war rages on and as he more like fights in it, he becomes more cruel and becomes more cold, especially towards like, the people he's fighting and even towards his own people. That until he meets another elemental that kind of like helps him kind of like get him down on the right path, is a character that also I'm going to be making a video on. I'm not really going to go into in depth about him, but his name is Clay Rockwell. So Clay Rockwell basically is someone who kind of helps, he's younger than Kova, but he's around the same age as him. So he kind of helps him kind of get down on the right path and is like, look, I know you don't want to fight. I know you don't want to do any of this, but we get to go home and see our families and whatnot. So, while they're set on a mission is that they want to go home. They don't care about anything else. No, they don't care about their opponents in front of them or behind them. They are trying to get home. That is all that Kova wants, is that he just wants to get home to his wife and kids. So, as the war rages on, get this, the Cinderella Man arrives. I'm not going to be a broken record. All heck breaks loose. Except the thing is that when, when Cinderella Man gets involved with the war, he does a lot of damage towards the elementals, because the elementals were a big threat when it came to this sort of thing. Because I'm gonna get to this when I explain this in the in Kova's like abilities and whatnot. But the elementals are potent. They're very potent. They are extremely potent. So in a sense of, you can't necessarily, like, how am I trying to explain this, right? So basically, when an elemental is born, right, they are born as a formless, being. They're gray, they're they're gray, little tiny baby humanoid little creatures. They are molded by their surroundings and whatnot, right? So as Kova he grew up around sand, and thus his body is also a composite of just sand particles and whatnot. Thus, he becomes a sand person. similar to how a fire elemental surrounded by fire or a water elemental surrounded by water, they become that said element. So during the war, let's just say that they weren't the easiest to hit, because they are made of that element. So it's not like you can like punch them and they'll be like, oh, you hit me. Nah, that punch is gonna go like straight through. You remember Spider-Man 3 where like Spider-Man is fighting Sandman and that like money bus truck or whatever, and like he punches through Sandman's like chest and like his hand is on the other side. That's what it's like fighting an elemental. Like you can't necessarily touch them. Though yes, they are practically invincible, they're not invulnerable. There is one thing that can take out an elemental, and that is their soul gem shard thing. I think I mentioned in my last video, but it's called a soul gem. So this soul gem, every elemental is born with it. When they're younger, it's kind of more or less like on the outside of their out of their chest area. It could appear on any parts of their body. It could be, heck, it could even be like one of their eyes and whatnot, right? So, but they're born with their soul gem, and as they're surrounded by their elements, the soul gem tends to like absorb the environment that surrounds them. So, say for instance, like let's go back to the Kova right quick, right? So when he was born, he was surrounded by the element sand, right? So, as he was born in the desert and whatnot, when he was younger, he placed his hand in the sand and they at first it kind of like explode, like not exploded out, but think of like the dust magnets, like the finer sand magnets and whatnot. You like repel it, kind of like goes out for a second, but then his soul gem activates and then it kind of goes back towards him. And in fact, instead of like going on him, it goes in him, like he absorbs it around him, and like over time, as he grows to acquire more of his abilities and whatnot, he can form this into like different types of things like stairs or like shields, weapons, blah blah blah. So, with the soul gem, that's basically, get this, their soul and whatnot, right? So over time, as they acquire more and they age, the soul gem kind of just goes, like, it's not exposed on their chest or their body anymore. It's literally inside their body, right? So, it could be anywhere inside their body. It could be in their bicep, it could be in their skull, it could be in their stomach, it could be in their ass for all we know, right? You never know where the soul gem is. And that's for the best, because if you destroy that soul gem, you kill the elemental. You can't necessarily kill an elemental unless you destroy that soul gem, right? So, and that's another thing I want to get into, is that if a soul gem were to crack, not necessarily be like shattered, but like crack, that causes an elemental to bleed. So, when the elemental starts to bleed, you can use that against them. And that's how Cinderella Man kind of figured out, because at first he was kind of having trouble with them, not necessarily saying like he was getting like bullied by them or anything, but he was like, oh, these beings are a lot more elusive than I thought. But then he like noticed, like when he was fighting one of the water elementals, he noticed like there was like a green shard kind of like flowing through the tidal waves. So he kind of goes after for an attack, and he doesn't necessarily hit it, but he like has so much force behind his punch, it cracks it. And that causes blood to kind of not shoot out, but like kind of like pour out from the gem itself, and that hurts the elemental. So he realizes this, and he tries his best to try to get that soul gem. He gets it, and he shatters it, and it kills the water elemental. But when he shatters the soul gem, he there's another elemental that kind of goes in for a punch, or like tries to go in for an attack, and he uses like the same like hand that he crushed the soul gem with, that's covered in the elemental's blood, and he uses it to hit, and it actually connects. So, as I said before, elementals are the only thing that can hurt an elemental. Very poetic, I know. But basically, he cracks the soul gem into his fist, the blood covers it, and he uses the blood of the elemental to actually touch them now. So, when he meets and encounters Yami, it's very cold, and I'm trying to remember how he says this to Yami. Give me just a quick second. Yami's like, "Oh, it seems my royal guards did some damage to you. You're practically bleeding." And and Cinderella Man looks at him like not perplexed, but like with the absolute like smugness that you would see in a villain. He's like, "It's not my blood." He's like, Yami is just awestruck, and he knows that he is like, not to say that Yami is like weak in any sort of way, but in fact, Yami is considered to be an apex elemental, and I'll explain that when I get to Yami's video. And there's going to be another Yami. I'll get to that when I get to that. But basically, with that being said, elementals are invincible, but they're not like they're not invincible, but they are basically indestructible if you don't know how to fight one, right? So with all that being said, let's kind of focus back on Kova. How does this affect him? So during this onslaught of the elemental people and them kind of like fighting against Cinderella Man, they stand no chance against him. So they're like, we did not sign up for this. Like at this point, like, everyone's kind of like fighting for resources. The jury rays were kind of okay because they had the elementals, but the elementals were like, we are dying. This is not what we signed up for. And it comes down to a point where they even see like Yami fighting Cinderella Man and losing. So they see their king losing to this guy. Like they like admire and respect their king and whatnot, right? So seeing them lose to him, they're like, if he's losing to Cinderella, what chance do we stand against him? What the heck, man? So Cinderella Man beats Yami to a pulp, and instead of like going after the rest of them, he kind of just leaves Yami and is like, and as I mentioned back in Alva's video, Cinderella Man and King Null are two separate beings. So Cinderella Man he wants to destroy, but he doesn't know why. So he's like, I'm not gonna kill you because you're not my target. I don't know why, but I have a feeling in my gut, chest, tree area. I gotta go. I'll leave you to your people. Your people look upset, so you gotta talk to them right quick, right? So at this point in the story, all the elementals turn on Yami and they tear him to shreds. With him being an apex elemental, he's able to hold him off for a little bit, but he was beaten ruthlessly by Cinderella Man, so he's not really in the best shape. But they tear him apart and they grab his soul gem and they just break it apart and whatnot. It's gruesome. It's gnarly. But at this point in the story, Cinderella Man does like leave a destruction and path in his wake, and it comes down to the point to where him and Yami, they were fighting so much they fought into the center of their own like homeworld and whatnot, and they destroyed the soul gem of that planet. It's a giant crystallized gem, and basically he impales Yami onto it. He doesn't necessarily kill him, the people kill him and whatnot, but basically he stabs Yami through it, and basically it destroys the soul gem and whatnot, right? So their planet is basically dying, and everyone around them is dying, so they're trying their best to go on like escape pods and escape, but Kova can't leave unless he has his family. But, in that exhuming chaos, he tries to find his family, but it's gone. His house, his home, and their people are gone. In the sense of they're dead. Basically, all that remains are lost. He goes back to his home and he sees his wife and child dead on the ground. He finds his son trying to protect his wife and child, and he's also dead. There's nothing for him left. And like basically Rockwell tries to get him onto the ship, but Kova doesn't want to go. He states that he wants to die on this planet. He wants to die with his family. But Clay Rockwell's like, my thing is that if they were around, they would want you alive. They would want you to be alive and live. So Clay Rockwell, they kind of get into a scuffle, but they basically go onto a ship, and that's what blasts off from the planet. Thus concludes their role in the Great War Saga. Not to say that this is kind of the conclusion of the Great War Saga. This is far from it. So that's kind of the interesting thing about elementals, is that like they are the first ones to say, nah, this is not worth it. We are not doing this. They are the first ones to kind of leave and or like basically get extinct throughout the Great War Saga. Again, out of all of the like aliens that are presented, the elementals are kind of the most frequent that are presented in the story. There's not like one Xerxian, and I say that like, there's not like any other like characters that are going to be like that and whatnot. But basically, when it comes down to it, the elementals are kind of the ones that were able to like leave and escape and kind of like survive and whatnot. They're still like, most of them are dead. It's not like they're like thriving or anything, but when it comes to the others, they at least still had some like form of like, we can still try to repopulate and whatnot, right? So, Kova leaves and he goes with Clay Rockwell. He is not happy with Clay Rockwell, by the way. But they land on Earth, and at this point, Clay and Kova kind of go their separate ways. I'm kind of writing out how that happens, but now we're going to go into the Rising Renegade saga. This is basically the story that focuses on Bolt, Bonk, and Blaze. How they fight against the government, against the tyrannical government that's run by Yami. Afro, wait a second. You said Yami died, and I'm, be patient, my Afrolites. Be patient. As I mentioned before, yes, there is Yami, but there's another Yami. So I'm going to get to that when I get to that. But basically, at this point in the story, Kova is kind of working as like an undercover agent, a double agent, I guess you could say, for both the tyrannical government and also a government known as Shadowflight. And I messed this up in one of my other videos. I can't remember which one. I think it was probably my Junito video, but I said Blackflight. I meant to say Shadowflight. Shadowflight is basically an undercover society, an undercover agency that fights against the corruptness that happens on the Legend universe. And as I mentioned before, this is the same Earth that Junito goes to, and that it's completely separate from the Chronicle universe, the Chronicle Earth, I guess you could say. This has their own stories and their own characters and whatnot, but basically he works as a double agent from there. He has two, not underlings, but like two, like, commanding officers that follow him, that being Rhythm and Blues. They're going to have their own separate videos. Again, they're not really present in the Great War Saga, so their videos are going to come later on down the line. But basically, he kind of has his new life here, and also he finds himself a new love, and that being Mother Selma. Mother Selma is the sister to Mother Salem, who is the adoptive mother of Bolt, Bonk, and Blaze. But basically that's kind of where his story is right now. And as I mentioned before, this kind of leads up to where he has conflicts with Yami again. So at this point in the story, like Bolt, Bonk, the Renegades are basically kind of at their lowest. Yami beat them and like destroyed their town that they were living in, like, or protecting, I guess you can say. And, at this point he's like, you know what? I will not let, he becomes like kind of like a father figure to like the younger Renegades, not the younger, but like they become like, he becomes like a mentor to the Renegades and whatnot. And he like does not like the fact that Yami hurt these, like, not to say kids, but like these young like adults and whatnot, right? They're reaching that age where it's like, they're not kids, but they're still kind of kids. Anywho, like he and Clay Rockwell, yeah, they kind of like formed their friendship, and it's like, we gotta take Yami down. So him and Yami kind of go and confront, him and Clay Rockwell kind of go and confront Yami, and they kind of have a big fight, and Yami encapsulates him inside of a dark dome. This dark dome, Yami, I'm going to explain his powers and abilities when I have his video, but basically he can also not only control darkness and shadows, but also he can control your fear in said darkness and shadows. It can encapsulate your greatest fear, or like that's something that hurts you the most, he'll bring it up and whatnot, right? So he brings up the final moments that he had with his daughter. And this scene, like when I write it out, and even like thinking about it and like writing out, kind of made me tear up. It like, remember the movie Interstellar, kind of like how God, I forgot his name, great actor, but I forgot his name. But basically I think he goes through like a wormhole or something, and like he kind of basically outlives his daughter and whatnot, right? Kind of like how Kova did. But anywho, Kova is like, he's kind of like blocked off from this barrier, and he sees himself talking to his son and daughter. He talks to his son first, saying like, you need to be the man of the house, and I love you, and I love your mom, I love your daughter. You need to step up, and I need you to protect not only your, our family, but the rest of our people. And I know you're going to do that because you have the Dragoon blood running through your veins, and you're going to make me proud and whatnot. And he has this emotional moment with his son, and then he goes to his daughter, and his daughter is really upset because he has to leave, but he comforts his daughter and tells her that no matter what happens, I will always come back to you. And, all I ask is just that you wait for me. And, it's very heartbreaking and it's very sad. And this breaks Kova. Kova was already very much a stoic man. He didn't want to show his emotions and he wanted to keep himself calm. But, when he kissed his daughter goodnight and when he left the room, he yelled at his past self. He said, "Stay, I need you to stay with them." And he calls his past self a coward for leaving them to fight in a pointless war that didn't even amount to anything for his people except for death and destruction. He cries, he tears up. He's like, "You are a coward. I hate you. You should have stayed." And, that's just one of the main moments and one of his like main focal points that he has like in the Rising Renegade saga. Obviously he gets out of it and he needs to like lock in and like say, I'll see them when I see them. They're gone. He can't go back in time and fix the past, and his past wounds is what makes him who he is now. And he has to focus up. And obviously, it's not him who takes down Yami. It's Bolt and whatnot, but he does help, like, try to at least like keep everyone safe. But basically, that's kind of where his role ends. Not ends, but obviously, there's going to be more stories I just haven't written them out yet, and how like he's going to play a role in there. But that's kind of what I have for Kova and whatnot. So, what is his powers and abilities? He can I was about to say teleport. He can So basically, with him being a sand elemental, he can morph his body into different types of weapons and materials. Not to say like sand hammer, sand swords, like giant hands and whatnot, right? So think of how Sandman is from Marvel Comics. Intangibility, right? He can't really be harmed by melee or any sort of like weaponry and whatnot. It just goes right through him. Obviously he has like regeneration with that intangibility. So like if you cut off his arm, he's just gonna grow a new sand arm and whatnot. And he can also reabsorb that sand arm. But he has say it with me now, super strength, moderate speed, again, moderate intelligence. He's not really like building machines and whatnot, but he is very, he's still like very articulate and whatnot, right? Battle IQ is pretty good, not to say that like he's over here thinking strategies and whatnot, but with him being one of the ranking members in the Elemental Army, one of the higher ranking members with his age and whatnot, he does have good battle IQ. His durability is really high, obviously because you can't really touch him. Like, you can hurt, like you can knock sand off of him, but you're not hurting him. It's like he can regrow that back. It's not like doing any damage to him or anything. So, and as I've said before, he can like transform his body, and he can actually, one of the best things about being an elemental is that you can take elements that are present there. Like, say for instance, like he was on a beach, he can absorb the beach sand and become bigger and whatnot. But when he absorbs that beach sand, that becomes elemental sand. So, and I'm going to explain this in just a minute, but basically he can absorb any sort of like sand and make it his own. And even wet sand, he could just like knock the moisture out of it and make it into dry sand. And that's another one of his abilities, is that the sand people have this technique to where like on their left palm, and on their like little pores and whatnot, it's a lot more potent and whatnot. So basically, if he touches you with his like palms on his hands, it absorbs like it basically takes the moisture out of your body and whatnot. So, if he touches you, you're doomed and whatnot. You're gonna get hurt. Another technique, not to, he has an ability, but also a technique that the elementals do, is that I need you to stick with me, but basically, like, take your hand and like kind of cup it to where you can make it in, like, think of it like a karate chop, but he cooks it, he crooks it at like such an angle to where it basically slices through anything. And this is known as the Akoshi chop. You know, it's, I'm working on that name, but think of it as like the Akoshi chop. So basically he can harden his hand to a point to where it's basically like dense enough to cut through anything, and it works like a knife, a blade, slice through anything, and all elementals have the ability to do this. So blaze, bolt, yami, rockwell, any elementals that are presented in the story, they all can, you know, chop, do anything. Basically it's like a one-stop shop. You know, it doesn't like stop through any, like it doesn't get stopped. Like this thing will cut through anything. It will cut through anything. The only way to deflect it is if you also have a chop ready, and that's the only thing that can really stop it. So, you know, he also has that ability. His combat prowess, he's not over here like throwing like taekwondo punches or anything, but he's not like he doesn't know how to fight. He's just more of a brawler, right? So he doesn't really block, because why would he need to block if he could just like tank all the punches and it's not going to hurt him or anything, right? Now, he does have to worry about his soul gem, but he can manipulate the inside of his body to kind of move the soul gem out of the way and make sure that no one touches it, right? So, you know, not to say that he isn't a good fighter, but he's not like up there with like Jun or Himawari, or even to Alva's standards. You know, Alva is considered a better fighter than he is, but that's only in the Chronicle universe and the Great War Saga, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, he is basically untouchable. So, as I mentioned before, the elements are much different to how the elements are presented in our world. Is that, say, for instance, you have fire, right? How do you put out fire? You pour water onto it, right? If it's an elemental's fire, it doesn't matter if you have a whole truck full tank of water. You're not putting out that fire. That fire is going to remain there unless A, the elemental who placed that fire gets rid of it, or B, an elemental's water gets rid of it. So, you know, that's kind of what makes elementals kind of OP, is that not only can they absorb elements from the outside world and make it their own, but they, you know, unless you have another element that kind of counters it, you're not really going to stop them. Like, you're not going to freeze a water elemental because you're not, it's not a nice elemental, right? So, you know, they're basically pretty much OP creatures. And as I mentioned before, you know, an only way to stop an elemental is another elemental. So, you know, that's kind of where Kova is right now, with his powers and abilities. What does this character morally stand? He very much is a morally good person. He just tends to be very cold and very unempathetic, because, I mean, let's face it, with all the tragedy that he's faced in his life, and with him, he kind of had it. He had a great life, and then that was taken away from him. So to say that he's not really the happiest camper would kind of be an understatement. But as he grows more attached to not only his like commanding officers' rhythm and blues, but also to the Rising Renegades, he realizes that he has found his new family. And with him being part of Shadowlight, a Shadow Flight, you know, that gives him a sense of purpose to kind of take out the evil that's present in the world, especially considering that evil is the son of like one of the worst like kings in all elemental history, right? So, you know, he's a morally good person, but he kind of starts off cold, but then tends to like warm up as it goes on. But what does this character mean to me? This character is very unique because I had him in the back of my head for a minute. Again, I just didn't know what to do with him. Like, I was like, I really want like a character to manipulate sand and like control sand and whatnot. I didn't know why. Like, I really like Sandman from Marvel, and I was like, I wish I had my own character who can control sand and whatnot. And obviously, this takes inspiration from Gaara from Naruto and Sir Crocodile from One Piece, especially the whole like intangibility part with them in One Piece with the Logia fruits and whatnot. I think that's really cool. So that's kind of where most of the ideas of the elementals came from, was how Logia users are presented in One Piece. You know, his design and whatnot. I can't really I'm not really going to go too much in depth with how I came up with this design. Just think of like a really tall human being and give him a color, splash it on his face, and like get rid of his nose. Boom, you got an elemental. You know, they're the most humanoid looking characters that I have, but they're so unique in their abilities and how their stories are, is that kind of what helps like differentiates them from all my other characters. So, that's kind of what I have Kova so far, and I really like his story. I really like how he had it all, but then he lost it, and that's what makes him more bitter and angry. But as he finds new purpose in his life, he kind of, you know, lightens up a little bit and realizes that, it doesn't like he can love his family and they're not there anymore, but he knows deep down inside that they will always be there in his heart. And for the past couple of weeks, I've been struggling realizing, I'm not going to go too in depth. I don't want to like trauma dump on you guys, but basically for the past like few weeks, I've been feeling kind of down about myself. And, I even like sat outside to kind of like think about my thoughts. And I talked to my dad about this, and I felt alone. But then I talked to my father about it, and he said, you're never alone. We will always be there with you. And regardless of whether I leave or your mother leaves, we will never truly leave you because we will always be there for you. And so, with that kind of helps me realize that, sure, I can feel alone, but I'm never alone. All I have to do is just reach out. And so, that's kind of what Kova has to struggle with, is that he realizes that he's alone on this new planet where people don't look like him or act like him. But again, with how everyone else is in my stories and whatnot, they find new purpose with their allies, and they realize that, or at least, with Kova and the rest and whatnot, they realize that there's more to them than what meets the eye. And this kind of allows them to build a new foundation and allow them to improve themselves. So, with all that being said, again, I really like how Kova's journey is and allows him to kind of develop and grow. And I can't wait to write more about him. And in fact, I actually have a plan to kind of write his own like side story called, what is it? I guess like Kova Dragoon Rise of the Sandman or something. It's not going to take place. It's going to take place like probably sometime during the Great War, where it kind of like focuses on him and whatnot. So, I really like this character. All I'm trying to say is that I really like this character, and I really like the story that he's going with right now. But again, with all that being said, I'm really happy to how these videos are turning out. And again, I know you guys are watching and I know you guys are listening. It's just, let's start a little small. I know we're gradually increasing, but I'm kind of like, I'm content to where I am now. Who knows? Maybe like 2 years down the line, where I forget to post videos, someone's like, oh, watch this Afro idiot talking about like different types of stories and whatnot. But, with all that being said, I am truly happy to how everything is turning out. And again, I just want to say thank you all so much for just being along with me on this journey. Especially, I want to say thank you, Dad. I know that, I know you're probably thinking to yourself, oh, I don't want you to thank me. I, in fact, want to thank you. But I know deep down inside that I probably wouldn't have continued making these videos if it weren't for your encouragement and your love and your wisdom to help me push through and allow me to keep developing these stories and keep developing these videos and have the passion to put my stuff out there, because, I got to grow some thick skin. I got to grow and, realize that, no matter what happens, I got to keep going. I got to focus on what I got to do. And if there are genuine criticisms, I'll listen to it. But if it's hate, it's hate, welcome to the internet. But with all that being said, I have been Afromandius. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in next week's video. Love y'all.